People, what is the most wildest thing you have witnessed at a party? I was invited to a party by a group of girls I knew but had never really hung out with before. There were 11 girls and 3 guys at the party, which felt a bit odd from the start. The 3 of us guys arrived at the same time, introduced ourselves, and were quickly directed to different areas of the house. At first, everything seemed normal. The girl who invited me showed me to a private couch in the basement, where we kissed and got more comfortable. She then started offering me drinks. Later, as it got darker, they lit a fire outside, and we all mingled for a bit around the flames. Eventually, I was led to a bedroom in the basement. We got on the bed and spent some time together, but after about 10 minutes, she suddenly stopped and said she would be right back. She left the room, and I noticed the light outside the door turned off. She came back a short time later, and things continued for a moment before I noticed something strange. The girl now felt different. Her appearance had changed, and I realized this wasn't the same person. I called out her name, but instead of answering, she kissed me. At that point, I decided to go with the flow since I wasn't done yet. I got more into it, but then she suddenly stopped, seemed to convulse for a moment, and told me to hold on before leaving the room. I was starting to feel frustrated when the door opened again, and another girl entered. This time, she was much more sensual, and we spent a little time together before she stopped, kissed me, and left. This cycle continued for what felt like quite a while, but honestly, I lost track of time. I wasn't sure how many girls had been in and out of the room, and by the next morning, most of the girls were gone. I had no idea if it had been 2 to 3 girls or all 11. I went home, sat down on my couch, and couldn't help but think about what had just happened. It was all very surreal and confusing. Story 2. The guy bolted to the bathroom, frantically shouting, "I gotta take a dump," as he rushed in. In his panic, he barely managed to yank down his pants before dropping onto the toilet seat. Just as he thought he had made it in time, his stomach lurched violently, and instead of relieving himself as planned, he vomited all over the floor in front of him. The realization hit him like a truck. He had aimed at the wrong end. In a desperate attempt to fix his mistake, he scrambled to his feet, turned to face the toilet, and let loose another wave of vomit. Unfortunately, in the process of repositioning, he completely lost control of his bowels and ended up defecating all over the floor behind him, creating a disaster far worse than what he had originally feared. Story 3. Our CEO hosted a Super Bowl party at his massive new house and invited the entire company. Around 30 to 40 employees showed up, and as the night went on, the drinks kept flowing. The CEO, being the life of the party, was handing out shots left and right, keeping the energy high. At some point, one of the new hires, clearly unable to handle his liquor, lost control and vomited all over the back patio. The crowd reacted with shock and disgust, and then the CEO, probably more drunk than anyone, stepped up and made things even crazier. With a grin, he looked at the guy and said, "I'll give you $100 if you eat it off the ground." The poor guy glanced at his wife, who looked absolutely horrified, then turned back and countered, "I'll do it for $1,000. Without hesitation, the CEO pulled out a wad of cash. Apparently, he just walks around with that kind of money, and handed him the bills. Out of nowhere, a spoon appeared, and, to the horror of everyone watching, the guy actually went through with it. The crowd erupted, half in disbelief, half in drunken excitement. Then the CEO, laughing, casually mentioned, "I would have paid you $10,000. Fast forward to Monday morning. Turns out the joke was on him. The CEO fired him, saying, "We can't work with people who would do something like that." Seriously, what the hell? Story 4. A girl found out her boyfriend was supposedly cheating on her, so she went into a room and did something completely out of line with a random guy. She then walked out and slapped her boyfriend in the face with her hand, covered in what had happened. It was such a shocking moment that I honestly thought the boyfriend might react violently. After talking to a friend who was close to the guy who got slapped, I learned that the boyfriend wasn't actually cheating. It turns out the girl was just very jealous of her boyfriend having female friends, and the alcohol made her jealousy spiral out of control. This whole situation really escalated at that party, which was full of craziness. People were ripping phone lines through walls, and one person even took the front door. The party was at a mansion with a couple hundred people for a Halloween bash. There was a ton of alcohol, and it got out of control. At one point, someone asked about the door, and it turned out it was gone. No one knows who took it, but it was definitely an unforgettable party. There were some wild scenes, people hooking up in hallways, driving cars on the lawn, and even a bounce house getting wrecked. The house had a movie theater where I made out with a couple of girls, and the chaos didn't stop for hours. The homeowners were rich, so they likely didn't care much about replacing a door. Afterward, when my school found out about the party through social media, they suspended anyone who was in the photos. It was like Project X before Project X was even a thing. The police didn't show up because the mansion was tucked far back in the woods on a massive property, with neighbors far away and the place gated. Even if cops came, they wouldn't have seen anything. Regarding the guy who got slapped, there was a lot of speculation that he had been cheating, but he wasn't. He was accused of flirting with another girl, but my friend, who was with him the whole night, said he didn't even talk to any other girls. He had to intervene to stop the boyfriend from retaliating after the slap, and in the process, some of the aftermath got on my friend's shirt. Story 5. My 21st birthday party was quite an eventful one. I had just returned from a trip where I celebrated my birthday, and my uncle had recently moved out of his house since it was going to be demolished, so we decided to throw a party without worrying about anything. I invited 60 people I knew, but it ended up being double that number. With alcohol flowing and a few people using substances, things quickly got out of hand. 1. I had a room with a doorknob that I kept with me, and I used it to store personal items safely. At one point, a friend asked for a private space with her boyfriend, so I gave her the doorknob. They used the room, but later lost it, and it became the party room. Cleaning up afterward was not fun. On top of that, some of the nice alcohol my friends gifted me was stolen. 2. At least a dozen people ended up vomiting in one of the 2 bathrooms, so I had to create a separate room for those who needed to sleep it off. One guy even threw up blood. Yes, blood. So I had to call an ambulance for him. He ended up getting his stomach pumped. At the end of the night, a guy no one knew passed out in a room after vomiting, so I had to call a cab to get him home. 3. I nearly got arrested a few times throughout the night for being the host of the party, twice for noise complaints. The police didn't make a big deal out of it. Once for public indecency, there were people barely clothed on the balcony, and a couple was engaging in public intimacy. And once for damage to a car outside, which I pointed out to the person responsible, and they were taken away by the police. 4. One of my friends, who was very drunk, saw a guy she liked making out with another girl. Upset, she punched the wall in frustration, but it wasn't a wall. It was a glass panel. She ended up with serious cuts on her hand and leg, so I had to call an ambulance. Her mother ended up picking her up from the hospital and accidentally got sick in her car. She needed stitches for both injuries. 5. Since it was my birthday, my girlfriend wanted to give me a gift, but every time she started to, we got interrupted by some new party drama, like the ones listed above. As the host, I had to manage everything, so it wasn't exactly a smooth night for either of us. There's also a rumor that something inappropriate may have happened in one of the rooms, but I have no concrete evidence or witnesses to confirm it. Story 6. I was hosting a house party my senior year in Germany when one of my friends showed up, handing me an empty Hennessy bottle. Apparently, he drank the whole thing as a pre-game, and needless to say, he went straight to my couch and passed out. I woke him up, carried him upstairs, and threw him in one of my guest rooms so he could sleep it off for a few hours and join us later. As the night went on, a girl showed up who was definitely ready to have some fun. Hennessy Man eventually woke up and came back downstairs, where he and the girl hit it off immediately. They started getting a bit too intimate on the couch, so I told them to find a room. They went upstairs, and things took an unfortunate turn. He started throwing up in my room. Thankfully, most of it went into the toilet. I grabbed a bucket to help clean up, but when I walked in to give it to him, I was greeted by the sight of the sheets moving, and, well, it looked like he was getting a little more attention while trying to hold the bucket. I just gave him a look and dipped out of the room, leaving them to do their thing. A few hours later, I had a group of 6 people in my bedroom, getting ready for some wild action. One of the girls wasn't into it, so I texted her and offered her a safe space in the guest bed. She accepted, and though the guys weren't thrilled, I stood my ground and told them it was my house, so if they had an issue, they could leave. Later, at around 4 a.m., I woke up to see one of the guys from the group walking around the hallway wearing only a rubber and a shirt. I couldn't help but laugh and just rolled over, hoping the night would end without any more surprises. The next morning, I found out that one of the girls had thrown up on my nightstand and spilled some on my books and floor. I cleaned it up, but even after mopping several times, the smell lingered. 3 days later, when I moved my bed to clean, I found out there was still more vomit hidden under it. Needless to say, cleaning up old puke wasn't a pleasant experience, and after that, I decided I was done with throwing parties. I threw 5 house parties that year, but that was the last one I ever hosted. Story 7. I have a bit of a different story than most, as I wasn't a bystander but the one who was involved in a very embarrassing situation. Here's what happened. It was a typical high school party, with lots of drinks, and I tend to lose track of how much I drink, which has led to some pretty embarrassing moments. After a few hours, things took a turn for the worse. Before all this, I had already had some mishaps like falling into a cactus and getting tossed into the pool. When the host's parents came home, they were just as drunk as we were. We were all hanging out in the kitchen, except for me. I had passed out near the pool on a lounge chair. Next thing I know, I came to and was acting in a way that I can't remember, but everyone else does. According to the group, I was being totally inappropriate and doing something completely out of line in front of the host's mother, who was understandably shocked and asking what was going on with me. I'd love to think it was just some wild prank my friends have been playing for years, but when I ran into his mom afterward, it was painfully awkward. I can't deny that this might have really happened, especially when I think about some of the other wild things I've done while under the influence. Story 8. It was one of the most embarrassing experiences of my life. I wasn't fully aware of it because, well, I was that guy, but I've heard enough stories to piece together what happened. It was Christmas break during my freshman year of college, and I came home to visit. In high school, I had never been to a party, but in college, that changed pretty quickly. I was drinking and smoking heavily, but I definitely thought I was a lot more experienced than I actually was. I got invited to a party hosted by some friends who were a grade below me, so they were seniors at the time. A couple of my friends and I decided to pregame at my place. In about 30 minutes, I knocked back around 7 shots of Svedka, and then I filled up a polar seltzer bottle with half vodka and half Dole fruit juice. We walked over to the party, and by the time we got there, I had finished the entire bottle. Needless to say, I showed up pretty much blacked out. Feeling like a party pro after a couple of months in college, I walked in with my arm around my friend and, thinking I was whispering, said loudly, "Hey, what girl do you want to hook up with? I got you." Turns out, I was shouting and pointing around the room. Everyone heard it. I then spent the rest of the night drunkenly hitting on girls, getting nowhere, and eventually trying to play beer pong, only to fall over while attempting to take a shot. But the real highlight came next. I went upstairs to use the bathroom, unzipped my pants, and then the next thing I knew, I woke up with a door hitting me in the head. I looked up to see the host and her 2 best friends staring down at me, lying on the bathroom floor with my pants and boxers around my feet. I tried to stand up and leave, but I ended up stumbling from wall to wall, knocking family pictures off the walls. Once I finally made it outside, I face-planted into the doorframe, jumped up, and then fell again, crashing into the side of the house, scraping my cheek along the shingles. There was a streak of blood, skin, and, well, dignity along the wall. And then, I just left. Story 9. Back in college, we had a party for Rush called Earn Your Stripes. The concept was simple. All the guys dressed up like military personnel and were given 3 chevrons. We were instructed to give them out to any girl we wanted for whatever reason. The girl with the most stripes at the end of the night won a $50 Victoria's Secret gift card. It was a pretty fun night overall. I gave out my stripes for simple stuff, a back rub, someone making me a drunk burger, just the usual party favors. Most of the girls kept it light, doing basic favors in exchange for stripes. But some took it a little further. A few girls flashed for a stripe, others gave a group of guys a stripe each, and there were some over-the-pants situations going on. But the one that stood out was from 2 girls who were known around the house for their partying habits. Anyway, near the end of the night, I was wandering from room to room looking for some friends when I opened a door to the last room where they had to be. What I found was definitely unexpected. One of the girls, wearing a skirt, had one leg up on a desk, and, well, let's just say she was fully committed to winning. There were about 7 other guys in the room, all watching in shock and awe at what she was doing. Needless to say, she won the competition that night. I'm sure that $50 gift card was well worth it. Story 10. Right after high school, I went to a party and was drinking with some friends. It was the usual scene. Loud music, cheap booze, and a bunch of people getting progressively messier as the night went on. Among them was this one girl who was absolutely wasted, yet somehow still managing to function. As expected, a few guys were hovering around, trying to hit on her. After a few hours, I was feeling pretty drunk myself and figured I'd crash on the couch. Just as I was about to doze off, the drunk girl plopped down next to me. She leaned in and, without hesitation, told me she was in the mood and that we should hook up. I was buzzed, but I wasn't about to say no. I told her I had a rubber, and she seemed all for it. Things started heating up, but after just a few minutes, she suddenly stopped me. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you want to do it, you have to tell me that you love me." I just kind of sat there for a second, processing that. Finally, I responded, "But I don't love you." Apparently, that was the worst thing I could have said. Her face twisted with heartbreak, and before I could say anything else, she bolted out of the room. I was left sitting there, completely baffled. A minute later, Chaos erupted. I heard people screaming from the kitchen, so I got up to see what was going on. And there she was, face down on the floor, dress hiked up, no inners, and unleashing what could only be described as an ungodly, volcanic eruption of liquid poo. It was like some kind of white trash Krakatoa, and the smell hit me like a brick wall. That was my cue to leave. I didn't stick around for the cleanup. Instead, I went out to my car, passed out until sunrise, and drove home, leaving that nightmare behind me. Story 11. Back in college, I went to a topless party. Literally, a party where both guys and girls were not in any shirt. The vibe was wild. The drinks were flowing, and at some point, I ended up doing a jello shot off a stranger's melons. Feeling like my friends were missing out, I ran a few doors down to tell them about it. By the time they showed up, most of the girls had disappeared into a back room to get high. Unfortunately for them, the main attraction left wasn't exactly what they were expecting. A big, bearded dude decided to take things to the next level by proudly showing off his Jacob's ladder piercing, turning the topless party into a full-blown bottomless one. Let's just say my friends didn't trust my party recommendations for a while after that. Story 12. We were throwing a house party for our roommate's 21st birthday, and naturally, the birthday boy got wasted early on. To keep him safe, we stuck him in the bathtub with the curtain drawn, figuring he could sleep it off and, if he puked, at least it would be contained. A couple of hours later, a girl showed up, a friend of a friend. She was 18, barely 5 feet tall, super pale, and had just come off a shift at Twin Peaks. Since I was the most sober host, I welcomed her in before stepping outside for a cigarette. 15 minutes later, I came back inside to find her on the floor, violently puking into a trash can. Well, that escalated fast, but given her size, I wasn't exactly shocked. The weird part? Between heaves, she was having a full-on conversation with my friend Daniel in fluent Spanish. That threw me for a loop, but hey, people have hidden talents. Daniel and I helped her to the bathroom so she could properly pray to the porcelain god. She asked to close the door, which was fine, but I reminded her not to lock it in case she passed out. Naturally, the first thing she did once inside was lock the door. What we completely forgot was that the birthday boy was still asleep in the tub. He was rudely awakened by what he later described as the worst-smelling crap he had ever encountered in his life. Trapped behind the curtain, he tried his best to stay quiet, gagging the whole time. Meanwhile, tiny girl, now suffering from some ungodly case of alcohol-induced diarrhea, was so embarrassed that she decided she could not face the party. Her solution? Escape through the tiny bathroom window. By the time we got the door unlocked, we found her halfway out the window, her crap-covered inner abandoned on the floor, and the birthday boy looking pale and traumatized in the tub. His big night forever ruined by an unwanted, horrifying olfactory experience. In the end, we set her up on the couch with a female friend to keep an eye on her. The next morning, she claimed she didn't remember a thing. And even weirder, she swore she didn't speak a word of Spanish. Story 13. We were throwing an outdoor party at an old house of mine when some random guy, who had shown up with about 8 friends, passed out on his side in the middle of the driveway. His friends, apparently unbothered, just let him sleep while the party carried on around him. At some point, someone suddenly shouted my name and pointed toward the unconscious guy. That's when we all saw it. Somehow, in his drunken state, he had managed to get his dong out and start peeing while still lying on his side. The entire party came to a halt as everyone turned to watch this bizarre spectacle unfold. The real magic, however, was in what happened next. As he continued relieving himself, he slowly began leaning backward. The arc of piss started rising higher and higher into the air as his body tipped further and further. Finally, he made it all the way onto his back, and with almost poetic precision, the last of his piss landed directly between his own eyes. Half the party was absolutely horrified. The other half? Well, they had a new legendary story to bond over for the rest of the night. Story 14. I was at a party at this massive house on the lake, which had a second living room upstairs. As I was heading up the stairs, I could hear a bunch of commotion coming from the room above. Curious, I walked in, and was immediately met with a sight I'll never forget. Right there, in front of everyone, a guy was absolutely busy with a girl right on the couch. No shame, no hesitation, just fully committed in the middle of the party. Other guys were high-fiving him. People were gathered around watching, cheering like it was some kind of sporting event. It was wild. Fast forward a few years. I get married, and one Thanksgiving, I'm at dinner with my in-laws when my brother-in-law introduces his new girlfriend to the family. And who walks in? Yep, her. The same girl from that night at the lake. the one getting banged on the couch in front of a crowd. As fate would have it, they ended up getting married. And now, every time I see them at a family gathering, I can't think about anything else except that unforgettable scene burned into my brain. Story 15. At this apartment party, some guy had passed out in the corner, completely dead to the world. At one point, I noticed another dude crouched over him, straining with everything he had, trying to take a dump on the poor guy's head. Thankfully, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, he just couldn't make it happen. Nothing ended up happening, and the passed-out guy remained blissfully unaware of the attempted crime against him. For a while, I debated whether I should tell him what almost went down. But then I thought about it. If someone had tried to dump on my head while I was unconscious, would I really want to know? Probably not. Story 16. A girl in her teens threw a massive house party while her parents were out of town, inviting what felt like half the school. She was one of those stuck-up types, surrounded by people, but without any real friends, just a bunch of fake ones. At some point, this one guy was just minding his own business, having a good time. But for whatever reason, she didn't like him. So, like the queen bee she thought she was, she rallied a bunch of people to start treating him like crap. Eventually, she told him to leave. Before heading out, he said, "Fine, but I gotta use the bathroom first." Problem was, every bathroom was occupied. She smugly told him he wasn't allowed to use the restroom and needed to get out immediately. Without missing a beat, the guy looked around and said, "Oh, there's a urinal right here." Then, in front of everyone, he punched a hole in the wall and pissed in it. Legendary exit. Story 17. This all went down at my house. A girl came over, got way too drunk, and things quickly took a weird turn. She started getting out of her clothes and, before anyone could react, she started going solo on my stairs. Then she moved to the couch, did the same thing, and ended up back on the stairs again. At first, we tried to get her to bed, but every time we thought she was settled, she'd come back out, each time with fewer clothes on. Eventually, she ended up completely bare. That's when she started doing her thing, and at that point, we all just kinda gave up and let her do whatever she wanted. Edit. I realized I wrote this out of order. We tried to get her to bed several times first, but every time she came back out, she had less and less on until she was totally bare. That's when things took that strange turn. Story 18. I was working at a pub hosting a gypsy/traveler christening when things quickly went south. The day started off fairly well. The head of the family, the father of the child, handed me £1,000 in cash for the bar, telling me two things. One, if any trouble came up, I should speak to him first, and two, no one was allowed to spend any money. If the cash ran out, just ask him for more. Everything seemed fine at first, but then, a young male guest got handsy with my waitress. I immediately informed the family head, and 10 minutes later, the boy came back with a slowly blackening eye and a very profuse apology to my waitress, who handled it like a champ. As the party started winding down, the family head came to me with £200 in cash, telling me it was for both me and the waitress because we hadn't treated his family like gypos, as most people tend to do. Just as they were getting ready to leave, I heard him shout at his wife. I looked up just in time to see him lay his hands on her in the side of the head. She staggered, and I rushed over to grab the baby while she fell to the floor. I handed the baby off to another female family member, then grabbed the waitress and ducked behind the bar as a full-on Wild West-style brawl broke out between about 50 to 60 men, women, and children. Memorable moments from the chaos included a woman hitting the family head with a chair and a child, no older than 10, gleefully throwing glass bottles into the crowd while giggling like it was a game. Police riot vans showed up and cleared out the travelers, arresting those who couldn't flee. I had to stay late to clean up the mess. The worst part? The bar owner watched it all on the security cameras. He sent his wife upstairs to check it out, then locked the steel-reinforced office door behind her to protect himself after she left. All of this happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, broad daylight. This all went down in Northern Ireland about 10 years ago, though it seems to happen a lot elsewhere too. And sorry if I caused confusion with the grammar earlier. Some readers thought a woman hit a man with a child, which made me laugh, so I'm leaving it as is. Story 19. I went on a road trip to Alabama with my college roommate, so he could try to win back his ex. We spent the week partying, and one night we went to a wild outdoor frat party. We were already pretty drunk by the time we got there. My roommate and his ex started making out, and I joked that they should get a room. They disappeared, leaving me to chat with a guy who, in my drunk state, I swore looked just like Christian Bale. I ended up getting his number for some reason and went off to find my roommate. Suddenly, a group of girls screamed like they had found something shocking. I looked over and saw my roommate and his ex behind a truck, being a bit too public with their affection. To make things worse, he was flexing for everyone to see. They got kicked out, and I got kicked out with them. And somehow, I still have Christian Bale's number in my phone. Story 20. At a high school house party in 2012, I accidentally walked in on a girl in the restroom who was a bit out of it from drinking and smoking. She was in the middle of relieving herself, but had unfortunately missed the toilet. She wasn't shy about me being there and casually mentioned she didn't want to waste the clean water, thinking someone might want to drink it. I was left feeling a bit confused with a hard wand by the whole situation. Story 21. I saw a guy lose at beer pong, and he got so mad that he punched the nearest thing to him. Turns out it was a window. In movies, breaking a window seems harmless, but in real life, if you punch through one, the glass can cut so deep that it feels like you might lose your hand. There was so much blood we honestly thought he had sliced his hand off. One of the sober people rushed him to the hospital, and the rest of us just left because the whole scene was so intense that no one was in the mood to keep partying. Thankfully, he ended up okay. He has a pretty gnarly scar now, but at least he didn't lose his hand. Story 22. A guy had a pretty rough moment when he tried to dance with a girl and ended up so drunk that he ended up soiling himself. It was a mess, and it kind of defined the rest of his time in Korea. Edit. This happened around 2005 to 2006 when we were stationed at Camp Casey and later moved to Camp Castle, just up the road. We were the main support battalion closest to the north. He wasn't nervous, just had a bad habit of losing control when he got completely wasted. Story 23. It was a typical college party, with a good mix of men and women, and everyone seemed to know each other to some degree. People were drinking and enjoying themselves. At one point, a guy, who was known for his dominant personality, started dancing closely with another guy. A couple more guys followed suit, and things quickly escalated from there. The scene became increasingly unusual, and someone asked, "Aren't you all straight?" Since most of the guys had girlfriends or had been flirting with women earlier. As the situation continued to unfold, the atmosphere became more intense, with some of the guys daring each other to kiss or do more. The girls at the party were cheering them on, encouraging the antics. One person, clearly uncomfortable, voiced their discomfort, saying it was getting too much. The group involved in the dancing and playfully provocative behavior responded by accusing him of being uncomfortable with his own feelings. The person left, and soon after, the atmosphere calmed down. The guys put their shirts back on and returned to their usual activities, like talking with their girlfriends or chatting with other people at the party. It was a strange and unexpected moment, unlike anything I had experienced before or since. Story 24. When I was a sophomore in high school, a girl I knew invited me to a party at her house. Looking back, I realized she probably liked me. I didn't usually go to parties or drink, but I was curious, so I decided to attend. When I got to the party, the future valedictorian of our class was dancing on a glass table, barefoot, without a shirt. Just as I noticed, the table couldn't support her weight and collapsed. Since I was one of the few sober people there, I ended up handling the situation. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad. There weren't too many tiny or sharp pieces of glass, and she wasn't hurt too seriously. Story 25. I went to a party in college and ended up at the beer pong table. I teamed up with this girl I worked with, and we totally dominated the game. I was on fire and managed to win every match. The house rule was that if you got completely beaten, skunked, you had to remove an article of clothing for every round you played. By the end of the night, my partner and I were the only ones still fully dressed. Honestly, it felt a bit awkward because all I really wanted was to see my coworker in a more relaxed setting. Story 26. I didn't see it myself, but I heard about it the next day. Every year, a sorority would hold their holiday party at our banquet hall. Most of the time, someone would drink too much and end up throwing up in the bathroom or outside. But this one time, a waitress noticed a girl sitting on a guy's lap halfway through the party. She was moving up and down slowly, not really drawing much attention from the drunk crowd. The waitress thought they were just hooking up and left them alone. However, when she went to refill water glasses and clear some tables, she saw that the girl's inners were on the floor and her skirt was hiked up, all while she was moving without any awareness of her surroundings. The party captain quickly stepped in and told them they had to leave. The girls in charge apologized, but they were banned from holding any future events at the hall. Another time, there was either a birthday party or a christening, I can't remember which. One lady thought it was a good idea to change her baby's diaper on the table in the middle of the event. She was told there was a changing table in the restroom, but instead, she decided to change the diaper right there and then tossed it under the table. We had to throw out the linen after that party. Story 27. We were at a house party where everyone was pretty drunk when someone brought out the host's tiny kitten from a room it was kept in. It got passed around, with people petting it a bit too roughly. I wasn't close to the situation, so I'm not sure if it was mishandled so badly that it broke its neck, or if it passed from stress or was dropped. But at one point during the night, a girl started screaming that the kitten had passed away. The worst part was that the host was crying and screaming, but there were still guys trying to convince her to let them continue with the party. Story 28. I was at a college pool party with my friends, and while they invited some odd-looking guys, they brought a lot of food and drinks, so we didn't mind. We were all just enjoying ourselves in the pool. It wasn't very big, maybe 15 meters long at most. When out of nowhere, those guys started being intimate right there in the pool while everyone was still inside. We all scrambled out of the pool. Some of the girls were screaming, but those guys just kept going, completely unfazed. It was honestly unbelievable. Story 29. I used to collect money from everyone who wanted to party, then I'd use it to organize everything. One time, I was at a Goodwill store and found a giant box of plain white t-shirts and another box of plain white boxers. They were all unused, donated items. I asked if I could buy both boxes for $100 and got them. Then I bought a bunch of alcohol, mostly vodka and Everclear, plus a couple kegs of beer. I got tons of fruit and juice, and even bought 2 kiddie pools to fill with watered-down juice. I soaked peaches and bananas in vodka, and had a couple watermelons with a hole cut in the top, with the rest of a bottle of Everclear poured into each one. For the party, the rules were simple. Guys wore boxers, and girls wore t-shirts. If you were a guy, you had to bob for peaches, and if you were a girl, you bobbed for bananas. After that, you could party. It was a totally ridiculous idea, and it didn't really work like I thought it would, but it did get everyone totally messy, sticky, and incredibly drunk. There was bear scene everywhere, and even the most modest people ended up showing some skin. So, in the end, everything went exactly how I expected, though those peaches and bananas were a real challenge to get, which made everyone even messier. Story 30. My friends had a few too many drinks and started being affectionate with each other in the kitchen. After a while, they moved to a different room and closed the door behind them. It seemed like things got a little intimate, and I was surprised since they weren't really what I would have expected in that kind of situation. Later, one of them came out with a hickey, and since I was sober, he asked me to help him take it off before work the next day. We ended up in the bathroom, trying to do what we could to fix it. He seemed a little more into it than expected, which was a bit odd. Afterward, we ended up spending some more time together, and the night took a more personal turn. Story 31. My friend, a big guy who was around 400 pounds, used to work as a bouncer at college parties to make some extra cash. One night at a frat party, he went upstairs to find a bathroom, as the downstairs ones were crowded with drunk people. When he got to the hallway, he noticed 2 voices coming from a bathroom. One was male, the other female. He quickly realized the girl was crying. My friend wasn't a fan of the frat scene. He was there for the money and didn't care much about fitting in. But once he realized something wasn't right, he took his responsibility seriously. The door was locked, so he knocked. No answer. The voices stopped. He didn't hesitate. He smashed his shoulder into the door and broke it open. Inside, he saw the girl and the guy. The girl, who was small, looked scared, while the guy was much taller but still nowhere near as big as my friend. He noticed the girl seemed distressed, and her shirt was askew, with makeup streaked down her face. Her jeans were unbuttoned. Without a second thought, my friend looked at the guy, then at the girl and said, "You're not doing this." The guy was smaller than my friend, and in an instant, my friend pulled him away from the girl, handling the situation swiftly and decisively. He dragged the guy down the stairs and, with a quick move, tossed him outside into the bushes. The girl, still in shock, hugged my friend tightly and thanked him through tears. The entire party had gone silent as they watched everything unfold and began to understand what had happened. Story 32. I went on a camping trip with my then-boyfriend and 3 other friends. One of the guys had just gone through a breakup, so we expected him to drink a lot to take his mind off things. Well, things quickly got out of hand. We were all drinking and having fun, but he ended up getting really drunk and started yelling loudly across the lake. Since we were near lake properties, his shouting became pretty noticeable, and it was getting out of control. Then, he started acting erratically, so we managed to get him settled and put him to bed before things escalated. About 15 minutes later, we were sitting around the campfire, and he came back out, still making loud, strange noises. At this point, he was fully intoxicated, barely aware of what was going on around him. He started spinning around and, in his disoriented state, made a mess while we tried to calm him down from a safe distance. Finally, the bravest of us managed to help him back to the tent, where he ended up passing out after a lot of noise, leaving a bit of a mess behind in his sleeping area. Story 33. I went to a very unconventional party in college once. It was my first party there, and the host, who owned the house, had his band, Glitoris, providing the music. The band was made up of a guy screaming into a microphone while another guy banged on some trash cans. It was chaotic, to say the least. The party had already taken a wild turn when suddenly a dozen or so girls came out of another room. They were all dressed in different, creative outfits made from various types of meat, deli slices covering their chests, sausage links hanging around their necks, and more. Some of the girls were carrying bags of raw meat, while others had bags of glitter. In a synchronized moment, they opened their bags and tossed the contents into the air. Imagine a group of about 50 people in a wild mosh pit, headbanging and flailing, with glitter and raw meat raining down on them to the sound of trash cans being hammered and a man screaming into a microphone. There was raw meat everywhere, ground beef, chicken wings, bacon strips, and steaks, thrown about with wild abandon. Some of the girls were even pulling sardines from their clothes. The mix of sweat, meat juices, and glitter turned everything into a chaotic, sticky mess. It was one of the most bizarre and surreal experiences of my life. Story 34. I remember one time when I was 18, and I went to a classmate's birthday party. His older sister, who was in her early 20s at the time, ended up getting involved with me and a friend of mine. At the party, another friend of ours was in the room too, pretending to be asleep. I always thought it must have been awkward for him, being the only one who didn't participate, but he was a bit socially awkward. Looking back, I realize how chaotic the night really was. We all drank way too much, and we found some homemade fruit liquor in the fridge that, in hindsight, had probably gone bad. But we were too drunk to notice. We all ended up getting sick during the night, and I had trouble with certain things at first, while my friend and the girl were both too intoxicated to even fully engage. The aftermath was a bit strange at school. People had seen us making out, so it wasn't hard to figure out what had happened later. There was a mix of teasing and jokes, but also some acknowledgement. Even now, years later, the guy whose birthday it was still seems in denial about what went down that night. Story 35. For my 21st birthday, I threw a party that ended up being pretty wild. There were around 40 people there, and it turned into one of the more memorable nights, especially with everyone rolling on MDMA. It definitely wasn't your typical party. Aside from everyone being in a great mood, there were some more intense moments. In one of the side rooms, a group of people had turned a cozy area into something much more than just a hangout spot. While others played games like Twister, a few people in the cuddle area were getting much closer. There was also a girl who was very intoxicated and tried to get my girlfriend and me involved in some more adventurous fun, but we politely turned her down after some kissing. She didn't let that stop her, though, continuing to flirt and make moves until she found someone else to focus on. The night carried on, and the cuddle area became a bit of a hot spot. A couple more people joined in, and things got pretty intense. People came and went, but the atmosphere was still wild and unpredictable. The whole scene was framed by a big Bob Marley blanket hanging from the ceiling, offering just a bit of privacy, but not enough to hide everything completely. It was a crazy party, one that I still look back on as one of the most unforgettable nights. Story 36. I was at a party when a couple went into a bedroom, which wasn't anything unusual. It happens all the time. They eventually came out, and I noticed this guy immediately rush into the room right after them. He dug through the trash, pulled out their used rubber, and walked out to the main area, drawing everyone's attention. Without missing a beat, he tipped it back and, to everyone's shock, swallowed the entire contents. The dude seriously did that in front of the whole party just to get a reaction. He seemed oddly pleased with himself, while the rest of us were completely grossed out. I've honestly been trying to figure out why anyone would do something like that since then. Of course, the guy whose rubber it was wasn't happy and tried to confront him, but someone broke it up, and the party wrapped up shortly after. Story 37. I was at a party with about 20 people when a game of A-hole started up at the dining room table. The conversation took a typical party turn, and at some point, I jokingly suggested the girls play the rest of the game without their tops on. To my surprise, they agreed, on the condition that I had to do something first. Their challenge: I had to wear women's lingerie and run around the house 4 times. The host girl brought down a very revealing outfit, and I thought to myself, well, it's melons. So, I stripped down, squeezed into the lingerie, and bolted out the door. It was midwinter, and there I was, running around the house in a lingerie, freezing my bum off in a pretty residential neighborhood. The party guests were dying of laughter, shocked I actually went through with it. Props to the girls too. 3 of the 4, the one with the biggest assets chickened out, kept their tops off the whole time. We played for about an hour longer after that. Later, 2 of the girls and I went upstairs as the party started to wind down. A 3 score seemed like a good idea, but one of them had to step out to throw up, so it didn't last long. Definitely a wild party, but it was all worth it for the experience, even if I was a little embarrassed. Story 38. My buddy and I heard about a big party near campus called the Heaven Sent Party. We had a few drinks and decided to check it out. When we got there, everything seemed pretty normal. I was in the kitchen having a beer when this really attractive girl came up and started flirting with me. We hit it off, and after about an hour, she invited me to go upstairs with her. She sits me down on the bed, gets close, and just as I'm starting to think this might be going somewhere, she reaches for the bedside table, opens the drawer, and pulls out a Bible. She asks if I'd like to read God's word with her. I politely declined and left. Turns out, the party was a Christian conversion event where they tried to lure non-Christians in with the promise of a good time, only to turn it into a chance to convert them. Definitely not what I was expecting, but it made for a good story. Story 39. This one's a lot more tame compared to some of the others, but in this situation, I was definitely the cause of the NSFW moment. I'm part of my college marching band, and after a big season game last year, we stayed at this really nice hotel with a rooftop heated pool. The pool closed at 10 p.m., but the gate from the parking garage was left open. The night before the game, I'd had a few too many drinks but still wanted to enjoy the cigar I had bought. So, I went outside to light it and eventually wandered up to the pool. When I got there, the place was empty, so I thought, why not? I ended up going for a swim, unclothed. Of course, I messaged my section, and one by one, they all showed up. Some of the guys joined in, and a few of the girls got in wearing their inners. At one point, I got out of the pool and, in a somewhat bold move, decided to flash the group with a little helicopter dong action. Unfortunately, I also left my wallet up there, and when I went back to get it, I found over $100 had been stolen, which was a major bummer. Story 40. This happened about 5 years ago at a party I hosted at my place. At the time, I had a pretty big house, and everyone was downstairs drinking, partying, and having a good time. My buddy and coworker had just finished a mid-shift, and at our job, sleeping on the clock wasn't allowed. It could actually get you fired. So, with a mix of booze and sleep deprivation, he started hitting on these two stunning blondes who could have easily been mistaken for twins. A few hours later, I realized I hadn't seen him around, so I started asking people. Turns out, he had made his way upstairs to find a little peace and quiet. I went to check on him and found him sprawled out on the bed, napping. Given the strict rules at work about sleeping on the job, I figured this would definitely be considered NSFW in the context of our workplace. Story 41. A few years ago, I was at a friend's party when a guy and a girl started getting intimate. They decided to go into what I believe was the kitchen to continue, unaware that the sliding doors didn't close all the way, allowing a clear view of what was going on. By the time they were finished, they realized that half the party had been watching. Naturally, they were pretty embarrassed. They tried to sneak out through the back door, thinking they could re-enter through the front, but it was locked. So, they had to ring the doorbell, both of them still partially dressed. The guy ended up getting lifted by nearly every guy at the party and carried around while everyone chanted. Story 42. At my brother's bachelor party, the Wild Vegas night kicked off with 4 hours of bottle service at Topgolf. Afterward, we piled into a limo and headed to a club. 2 of my brother's longtime friends are Vegas locals, so they know the owner and arrange for more bottle service. A few hours in, we're all hammered from the drinking. Everything's good, buying my brother a few dances, sitting at the tip rail bonding with my dad and uncle. Then one of my brother's friends comes up to me and says, "Come here, I've got a surprise for you." He rounds up some of the other guys and leads us upstairs to the private area, and I'm thinking, he is definitely bringing us a girl. I am happily married, so as we walk up, I'm running through excuses to not bang this Vegas girl. When we got upstairs, there was a girl bent over with a stick positioned in a very unexpected way. My friend had bought us a round of ring toss. Definitely not what I was expecting. We spent the night playing ring toss with a stick attached to a plug. Surprisingly top-notch fun. We stumbled into the room at 7 a.m., and when I explained the night to my wife, she was actually genuinely jealous. Story 43. My buddy was with a woman he met that night, and I was across the room on the bed. The lights were dim. Then, out of the darkness, I heard, "Do you like it when I, play with your stuff?" It was one of the funniest things I've ever heard. My roommate and I were in the military and had been out bar hopping. At the last place, my friend Mike was spotted talking loudly to a woman who worked at the chow hall on base. Our other friend clued me in that she wore an ear implant, and we both wondered if Mike knew she had hearing loss. After we got a cab back to where we were staying, I waited for Mike to come home. Around 4 a.m., I was woken by the sound of, well, some very loud and enthusiastic activity coming from the sofa bed across the room. I heard, "Do you like it when I, play with your stuff?" I started giggling. Mike's breathing changed, and he realized I was still awake. I was in fits of laughter under my blanket, and she was still going on. In between laughs, I shouted, "Hungry, hungry hippos." Mike told me to be quiet, so I decided to move to a spare bedroom to get away from the noise. Story 44. There was a slash dance competition where, with each round, participants had to remove a piece of clothing. Some people took off their jackets, others were down to their undies, and of course, a few got a little more daring. Then there was Jennifer, who, in a bold move, let loose and proudly flaunted her new assets. She ran through the crowd, dancing with her chest as the center of attention, playfully shaking them in people's faces and shouting, "Look what my wife got me! Do you like my new look?" Jennifer had definitely had a bit too much to drink. Her wife, however, didn't seem too pleased. Story 45. I was hanging out at a college bar one evening when two very drunk college girls walked in. One of them was celebrating her 21st birthday. At first, they started kissing openly in a booth. After a few Long Island iced teas, the birthday girl's friend decided to sit her up on the bar. The birthday girl then removed her shirt while her friend helped her with her pants. The friend climbed on top of the birthday girl, who was now on the bar in just her socks and inners, and began kissing her. The bartender, noticing the scene, pulled out his camera and snapped a few photos. He leaned over to us, looking a little uneasy, and quietly said, "This is definitely not legal." Story 46. I was at a bar in the Smoky Mountains one time. One of those places that felt more like a rundown single-wide trailer with a chipboard ceiling and a few questionable gambling machines off to one side. It was so deep in the mountains that you'd occasionally get just one bar of 1G service. Definitely not the kind of place you'd expect an outsider to wander into, but I'd been introduced by some well-known locals, so I was always welcomed with open arms. This was the kind of place where they'd sell you some homemade liquor and a six-pack for the road, and the service was so friendly, they'd even open the bottle for you. So, I'm sitting there with my buddy, and I noticed this guy who seemed developmentally disabled walk behind the bar. He was staring at the bartender in a rather intense way. Without missing a beat, she walked over to him, casually lifted her shirt for him to get a good look, and then went back to her business. The guy returned to his friends, and I thought that was pretty kind of her, so I let her know when I got my next drink. She mentioned she used to be Miss Barry's TN, and she was pretty proud of it. A few hours passed, and my buddy and I were the only ones left in the place when a local lawyer walked in. He stood out because he was the only person all night not wearing the usual mountain attire. He walked behind the bar to chat with the bartender and returned with a solo cup of moonshine, loudly encouraging her to break her own record. She looked at us and asked if we wanted to see her try. We agreed, but asked for some drinks for ourselves first. She brought a couple of shots to our table and sat down beside us. At this point, the lawyer was giving her some vocal support, and we were still trying to figure out what was going on. Before we could even process it, she kicked her legs up, made a move that was clearly part of some challenge, and, well, let's just say the spectacle was certainly unforgettable. The lawyer let out a mix of excitement and disappointment, explaining that her record involved hitting a certain target, but it seemed we'd missed the mark. Still, I said it had been a noble effort. She then jokingly asked everyone to take turns helping her see if she could improve, though in the end, it simply wasn't her night. It was certainly an interesting place to visit, that's for sure. Story 47. We had been out with friends, having a great time. We were helping each other out, making sure everyone had a good time. A group of girls joined us, and they were a bit more open-minded, but all in a fun, relaxed way. After a few drinks and feeling pretty good, they invited us to a private party at a place that's usually pretty fancy and expensive. It was on top of the building in a large glass room with a bar inside. When we got there, we immediately noticed something different about the vibe of the party. Let me tell you, there definitely was something off. People were kissing all around, usually more than just two people at a time. Some were being more intimate than that. It felt like we had walked into an incredibly wild, unrestricted environment. It was a little overwhelming, to be honest, and while it might seem exciting at first, it got pretty uncomfortable because of the overwhelming atmosphere. The story doesn't end there, though. There was one guy, who was older and not exactly the most attractive, but he seemed like he could be charming. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case either. I saw him doing something incredibly inappropriate and gross right on a table. At that point, we didn't even say goodbye to the girls. We just knew we had to leave. That night definitely changed how I looked at certain things. Story 48. I was invited by a friend to her birthday party at a cooperative house around 2001. For context, a coop is kind of like a frat house, but with more of a hippie vibe. I went to a liberal school where very few people joined frats or sororities, and those were mostly taken over by hippies, much like in the movie PCU. She handed me a flyer with the event details, which included a picture of her face and the words, naked dancing. She asked my boyfriend at the time to DJ the party with one condition. He had to play The Girl from Ipanema at midnight. She even gave him a 45 single of the song to make sure it happened. At midnight, the atmosphere changed as her friends cleared the dance floor. She walked out wearing a beautiful, flowing robe. Then, as the song played, she dropped the robe and danced in front of everyone, completely confident and bare underneath. She was quite attractive, and the crowd watched in awe, with a soft buzz of appreciation filling the room. However, things took a turn when my boyfriend mixed the song into a more upbeat, techno version near the end. She had been drinking, or maybe something else, and it seemed like she had choreographed the entire routine to the original version of the song. The shift in music confused her, and her friends had to step in and help her back into her robe, gently guiding her off the floor. It was an unexpected, intense moment, and while it was a little chaotic, it was definitely memorable. Story 49. I was at a small party in East Palo Alto with some friends visiting from out of town. Back in the early 90s, EPA was known as the murder capital of the US, and even in 2005 when this happened, things weren't much better. We thought we had made it clear that no one should go outside once the party started, but apparently not everyone got the memo. Later that night, one of the girls from out of town went missing for a while, and we made a brief effort to search for her outside. Just as we were about to hop in the car to look for her, she came running around the corner, visibly upset and crying. She explained that she had gone to the corner store to buy cigarettes, and while walking down the street, a car full of men started following her. Eventually, they pulled up next to her and tried to convince her to get into the car. They stopped in front of her, which was when she started running back to the house. We all went inside, turned off the music, and made sure the lights in the front of the house were off, just in case. That town had its fair share of strange and unsettling moments. Gunshots were a common sound when hanging out in the backyard, and we even saw a guy sitting on his lawn with an AK rifle on his lap. Story 50. There was this girl at the party who was a friend of a friend, but no one really knew her well. It was clear she was under the influence and was pretty out of it. We were all hanging out, having a good time, when suddenly she stood up, walked over to the refrigerator, opened the crisper drawer, which had a couple of bananas in it, and then pulled down her pants and, surprisingly, used the crisper as a toilet. Everyone was so shocked by what was happening that no one stopped her, and honestly, I think we were all just in disbelief. One of our friends, who had been trying to get her attention earlier, tried to de-escalate the situation by grabbing one of the bananas that had been, compromised, peeling it, and eating it to show everyone it was no big deal. Later in the night, that same girl ended up in the backyard with another friend, and things went a bit further. Story 51. I was at a college party, sitting on the front porch with a beer, when someone got thrown out of the house. They were literally tossed down the steps onto the concrete. Surprisingly, the guy was fine, got up, brushed himself off, and ran back inside. A couple of minutes later, he came back out, this time with a girl on his arm. They calmly walked down the steps, turned into the bushes, and immediately started hooking up. They seemed to think the 3-foot-tall shrubs would fully conceal them, but, well, they didn't. I saw it. The entire porch saw it. Everyone walking down the busy street saw it. Eventually, a public safety officer showed up, asked the girl if she was okay, and she responded, "Oh, heck yes." The officer let them finish what they were doing, then asked them to stay where they were. He called the police, and both of them got arrested. Story 52. I work in the AV industry, and a few years ago, I worked at a large hotel that hosted conventions. One week, they held a burn survivors conference with hundreds of people who had survived some of the most unimaginable injuries, like surviving plane crashes or being trapped in burning vehicles, often with severe burns over most of their bodies. Many of these individuals had lost limbs, suffered severe facial injuries, or had breathing problems from inhaling hot air and smoke. I quickly learned that these survivors preferred being called survivors instead of victims, and honestly, they had more than earned that title. I met many people who had found ways to live fulfilling lives despite injuries I could hardly imagine surviving, let alone healing and coping with on a daily basis. On the last night of the conference, there was a banquet and party with an open bar. As the night went on, people began to relax and have fun, dancing, socializing, and enjoying themselves, just like at any other convention when people are away from home, staying in free hotel rooms, and have access to unlimited alcohol. I saw the usual things. Someone getting sick in the bushes, a guy getting a little too into his dancing, and a couple sneaking some heavy petting in the hallway before heading upstairs. The most unusual part of the evening, though, was the after-party in the hot tub on the 5th floor. I stepped outside to sneak a cigarette and found a group of people who had decided to get in without swimsuits. It wasn't uncommon for conventions, but it felt different this time because around the hot tub were wigs and prosthetic limbs that had been taken off to keep them dry. While it was a bit surreal to witness, it honestly made me happy to see. These individuals had overcome challenges that most of us can't imagine, and it was heartwarming to see them come together in a space where they didn't have to worry about being stared at. I even had the chance to chat with a woman at the event that night who was incredibly beautiful. She was wearing an elegant dress that showcased her figure, as well as the scars on her back, shoulders, and neck. She was also missing her right arm and wasn't wearing a prosthetic. I admired her confidence in wearing the gown, which put her scars on full display. Unfortunately, she didn't return my flirtations. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.